In the spring of 1860, the United States was a nation splitting at the seams. Gold had been discovered in California, drawing hundreds of thousands of settlers to the Pacific coast. Yet, between the bustling cities of the East and the new wealth of the West, lay 2,000 miles of untamed wilderness. There were no transcontinental railroads, no telegraph lines, and no easy ways to communicate. To send a simple letter from New York to San Francisco took nearly a month. The mail had to travel by steamship down the Atlantic coast, cross the disease-ridden jungles of Panama, and board another ship heading north. If a storm hit the Caribbean, or if cholera struck the isthmus, the mail simply vanished into the sea. The only other option was the Butterfield Overland Mail stagecoach. This heavy wooden carriage bumped along a dusty southern route through deserts and hostile territories. It took 25 agonizing days of constant. On the brink of a civil war, this silence was dangerous. President James Buchanan sat in the White House, knowing that California's gold could fund the Union or back the rising Confederacy. But Washington had no fast way to reach the leaders in Sacramento. If California decided to secede, the nation needed a lifeline, and they needed it immediately. Enter William H. Russell, a wealthy Missouri businessman with a reputation for grand, risky schemes. Russell looked at the vast, empty map of the American West and saw an opportunity. He proposed a solution that most sensible men called suicidal. He wanted to build a chain of relay stations across the wilderness and use lone riders on horseback to carry the mail. He promised he could deliver a letter from Missouri to California in just 10 days. The critics laughed, calling it a physical impossibility for any horse or human to survive such a journey. The route Russell planned ran through the territory of the Paiute and the Sioux, who were actively defending their lands. It crossed the blistering deserts of Nevada and the snow-choked passes of the Sierra Nevada, and he convinced his wealthy partners, Alexander Majors and William B. Waddell, to back the venture. Together they formed the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company. They had just 2 months to build a massive infrastructure from scratch. Majors, a deeply religious man, demanded that every employee sign a pledge of conduct. They swore not to use and to behave with honesty. Each rider was issued a small leather-bound Bible to carry with them into the wilderness. Next, the partners had to purchase the finest livestock available. They bought hundreds of swift, durable horses, including Kentucky thoroughbreds and tough Western Mustangs. These animals had to be capable of galloping at full speed for 10 miles straight without collapsing. They also had to build nearly 200 relay stations along the route, spaced 10 to 15 miles apart. These stations were often nothing more than dirt floor sod huts or crude log cabins. They were staffed by brave, lonely keepers who lived in constant fear of attack. But the most critical piece of the puzzle was the riders themselves. The company placed famous advertisements in newspapers across the country. The ads called for young, skinny fellows, not over 18. They had to be expert riders, willing to risk death daily. And most famously, the ads added a chilling preference: Orphans Preferred. Hundreds of desperate, adventurous young men answered the call, eager for the high pay of $25 a week. Among them were legendary figures like a young William Cody, who would later be known to the world as Buffalo Bill. As April of 1860 approached, the horses were stationed, the riders were ready, and the nation watched with bated breath. Everything was riding on a system that had never been tested, in a territory where any mistake meant death. But as the first rider prepared to leap into the saddle, a sudden disaster threatened to destroy the entire process. In the spring of 1860, 3 men met in a dusty office in Leavenworth, Kansas, to pull off the ultimate gamble. William Russell, Alexander Majors, and William Waddell were already the kings of Western freighting. Their company owned thousands of wagons and tens of thousands of oxen, dominating the trails of the American West. But William Russell was a man who chased grand illusions, always looking for the next Washington, D.C. with a wild proposition that his partners thought was pure madness. Russell had made a verbal contract with a powerful California senator named William Gwin. The senator promised that if Russell could build a mail service that crossed the continent in just 10 days, the federal government would hand them a multi-million-dollar mail contract. At the time, the fastest mail took over 3 weeks by stagecoach, or months by ship around the tip of South America. To Alexander Majors, a deeply religious and practical man, the idea of cutting that time in half seemed like defying the laws of nature. Majors pointed out that they would have to build nearly 200 stations across a brutal, uncharted wilderness. They would have to buy hundreds of the fastest horses in America and hire riders crazy enough to risk their lives. Worse, they would have to finance the entire operation out of their own pockets before seeing a single dime of government money. Waddell, the conservative bookkeeper of the trio, ran the numbers and warned that the venture would bankrupt them. But Russell had already committed their company's name and reputation to the scheme. He argued that if they refused, their rivals at the Butterfield Overland Mail stagecoach line would monopolize the West forever. With their backs against the wall, Majors and Waddell finally relented, signing their names to the grand experiment. The partners shook hands and officially founded the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company. They had exactly 2 months to build a high-speed relay system spanning 2,000 miles of hostile territory. Russell immediately began buying up 500 of the finest, most durable horses he could find across the nation. He selected swift thoroughbreds for the eastern plains and rugged Mustangs for the steep climbs of the Rocky Mountains. Majors took charge of the logistics, establishing a chain of home stations and swing stations spaced 10 to 15 miles apart. These stations were often nothing more than dirt-floored log huts or stone dugouts in the middle of nowhere. To staff them, they hired station keepers who had to live in absolute isolation, surrounded by hostile terror. The right men to ride the horses. Russell placed famous advertisements in newspapers across the country, looking for a very specific type of recruit. The ads called for young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18 years of age. The notice added a chilling warning that preferred orphans, as the job was highly dangerous. The pay was $50 a month, a small fortune. Each rider had to take a solemn oath on the Bible, swearing not to swear, fight, or drink intoxicating liquors. Majors, a devout man, personally handed a leather-bound Bible to every single rider they hired. Among the young recruits was a 15-year-old boy named William Cody, who would later become famous as Buffalo Bill. The riders were trained to change horses in under 2 minutes, leaping from one sweating saddle to the next. To save every ounce of weight, the company designed a special leather saddle cover called a Mochila. The Mochila had 4 locked brass pockets, called cantinas, which held the precious mail. Only the station masters at the very ends of the route held the keys to these locks. The riders themselves carried only a revolver and a hunting knife for defense, refusing heavy rifles to keep the horses fast. By late March of 1860, the horses were stationed, the riders were hired, and the entire nation watched in disbelief. No one believed a letter could travel from Missouri to California in just 10 days. The Three Millionaires had risked their entire fortune, their reputation, and the lives of dozens of young men on a single, desperate gamble. The stage was set in St. Joseph, Missouri, where a crowd gathered in the cold rain to witness history. But as the clock ticked down to the very first departure, the mail from Washington was nowhere to be found. William Russell needed more than just a dream. He needed 80 men who were willing to risk their lives every single day. The advertisements he placed in newspapers across the country did not sugarcoat the danger. They asked for young, skinny, wiry fellows, not over 18 years of age. The ads openly stated that orphans were preferred, to keep the load light for the horses. These brave boys were paid $25 a week, a small fortune at the time. Before they could carry a single letter, every rider had to place his hand on a leather-bound Bible. They swore a solemn oath not to swear, fight, or abuse their animals. Then William Russell handed each boy a small, gold-bound Bible to carry in their pocket. But the real backbone of this entire operation was not the men. It was the 200 carefully selected horses. These were not ordinary farm animals. The founders bought the fastest, toughest horses America had to offer. In the rugged eastern stretches, they used speedy thoroughbreds. For the brutal rocky deserts of Utah and Nevada, they bought wild Mustangs. These Mustangs were captured from the plains and broken just enough to be ridden. Each horse cost up to $200, which was an astronomical sum in 18, ensuring they could run at a full gallop for 10 miles straight without stopping. If a horse collapsed from exhaustion, the male died with it. To keep these horses ready, the company had to build a massive network of stations. They constructed 190 relay stations across the wilderness. These stations were placed exactly 10 to 15 miles apart. That was the maximum distance a horse could run at a full gallop before giving out. At each station, a fresh horse would be saddled and waiting. A rider would gallop in, leap off his tired mount, and throw his mailbag over the new horse. The entire exchange had to take less than 2 minutes, but the riders could not run forever. Every 75 miles, this meant the mail never stopped moving, day or night, rain or shine. To carry the mail, the company invented a special leather saddle cover called a Mochila. This heavy leather sheet draped directly over the saddle horn. It had 4 padlocked brass pockets, called cantinas, to hold the letters. 3 of these pockets were locked at the start of the journey in Missouri and could only be opened in California. The 4th pocket was left unlocked for local mail along the route. The letters themselves were written on tissue-thin paper to save every ounce of weight. Sending a single letter cost $5, which is worth over $150 today. Only the wealthiest businesses, newspapers, and governments could afford to use the service. The weight of the mail was strictly limited to 20 pounds per trip. Even the riders' weapons were limited to save weight. Most riders carried only a single revolver and a canteen of water. Some did not even carry a gun, choosing to rely entirely on the speed of their horse to escape danger. The first test of this massive, expensive machine was set for April 3, 1860. In St. Joseph, Missouri, a massive crowd gathered near the train tracks. A brass band played patriotic songs as a young rider named Johnny Fry waited on his horse. The train carrying the mail from Washington was late. The crowd grew restless as the sun began to set. Finally, at 7:15 in the evening, the train roared into the station. The mailbag was rushed to Johnny Fry, who tossed it over his saddle. He spurred his horse, and the crowd let out a deafening cheer as he vanished into the dark. At the exact same time, on the other side of the country, and San Francisco, another crowd gathered. A rider named James Randall boarded a steamboat with his mailbag, heading for Sacramento to begin the eastward run. The clock was ticking, and the entire nation was watching to see if the impossible bet would pay off. But as the riders galloped into the wild territory, they had no idea that a dark storm was already gathering on the horizon. It was late afternoon on April 3, 1860, in St. Joseph, Missouri, and a massive crowd pressed against the wooden barricades. A brass band played lively tunes to drown out the nervous chatter of thousands of spectators. A sleek bay mare stood waiting, her muscles quivering with anticipation under a lightweight leather saddle. Beside her stood Johnny Fry, a wiry young man weighing barely 120 pounds. He wore a bright red shirt, blue trousers, and high leather boots, carrying no weapon but a small revolver. Draped over his saddle was the Mochila, a heavy leather mail bag locked tight with brass padlocks. This single leather pouch carried 49 letters, 9 telegrams, and a few special edition newspapers printed on tissue paper. The crowd fell silent as the local mayor stepped up to deliver a booming, long-winded send-off speech. But the crowd did not care about the politics. They only cared about the clock. At exactly 7:15 p.m., a distant locomotive whistle shrieked, signaling the arrival of the final mail delivery from the east. Johnny Fry leaped into the saddle with a single, fluid motion. With a sharp crack of his whip, the bay mare bolted forward, her hooves throwing up sparks against the cobblestones. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar as Fry disappeared into the gathering twilight. He rowed hard toward the Missouri River, where a steam ferry boat named the Denver lay waiting. The ferry captain had his engines screaming. Hit the wooden deck. As soon as Fry leapt aboard, the ferry groaned and surged across the dark, swirling waters toward the Kansas shore. Across the river, the vast, unsettled western wilderness lay waiting in pitch blackness. The moment the ferry touched the western bank, Fry charged off the ramp and vanished into the night. He had exactly 12 miles to cover in his first leg, pushing the horse to its absolute limit. The spring air was freezing, and a biting wind whipped against his face as he navigated the muddy trail. Every rustle in the tall prairie grass sent a jolt of adrenaline through his chest. At this speed, a single hidden badger hole in the dark could snap a horse's leg and send the rider flying to his death. Yet Fry kept his eyes locked on the horizon, searching for the dim lantern light of the first relay station. Exactly 45 minutes later, the wooden shack of Kennecook Station materialized out of the darkness. A station keeper stood in the yard, holding the reins of a fresh, resting horse that was already saddled. Fry threw his weight back, sliding his tired mare to a sudden skidding halt. He did not even dismount to the ground. He grabbed the heavy leather mochila from his saddle, swung it over the new horse, and leaped across. Within seconds, the sound of fresh hooves pounded back into the dark Kansas night. Nearly 2,000 miles to the west, an identical drama was unfolding in San Francisco, California. At the office of the Alta Telegraph, a massive crowd gathered under the gas lamps, waiting for the western rider to depart. A rider named James Randall stood ready with his horse, surrounded by shouting politicians and eager citizens. Because of the late hour, Randall and his horse boarded a fast steamboat called the Antelope, bound for Sacramento. The boat battled the strong currents of the Sacramento River Delta through the damp midnight air. When the boat docked in Sacramento at 2:45 a.m., the city was wide awake, decorated with flags and burning torches. A second rider, William Hamilton, snatched the mailbag and rode his horse down the gangplank into the chaotic streets. He galloped through the night toward the towering snow-capped wall of the Sierra Nevada mountains. These two riders, separated by half a continent of wild, uncharted territory, were racing toward each other. Between them lay deep canyons, burning deserts, hostile territories, and freezing mountain passes. Most people in the East believed the mail would never make it across this deadly gap. Back in Kansas, Johnny Fry was already on his third horse, pushing through a sudden midnight rainstorm. The dirt trail had turned into a thick, slippery soup of black mud. One slip meant the end of the line, but Fry knew the entire nation was watching. He pressed on, blind in the darkness, relying entirely on the horse's natural instincts to find the path. As the first gray light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Fry finally saw the wooden rooftops of Seneca, Kansas. He had survived the first night, but the most dangerous terrain on Earth still lay ahead. To cross the American continent in 1860 was to sign a contract with a beautiful, unforgiving death. The 2,000 miles of the Pony Express Trail were not a path, but a gauntlet. Leaving the fertile valleys of Missouri, the riders pushed straight into the Great Plains. Here the horizon stretched forever, an ocean of grass where the wind never stopped howling. This was the territory of the storm. Riders routinely found themselves trapped in sudden, violent hailstorms with stones the size of fists. There were no trees for shelter, no cabins for safety, only the open, naked earth. But the plains were merely the gateway to the real nightmare. As the trail rose into Wyoming, the air grew thin and freezing. To maintain the schedule, riders had to gallop through South Pass, a barren corridor 9,000 feet above sea level. In the winter, the temperature here plummeted to cut through wool and buckskin like a razor. Young boys, some only 15 years old, had to keep their eyes open in blinding whiteouts, looking for frozen landmarks. If a horse stumbled in a hidden snowdrift, it meant a broken leg for the animal and a slow, freezing death for the rider. After the freezing heights of the Rockies came the scorching, dry basin of Utah and Nevada. expanse of salt flats where the sun reflected like a mirror. In the summer, the heat here reached over 110 degrees. Water holes were miles apart, and many of them were bitter with alkali, poisonous to both man and beast. A writer named Billy Richardson once wrote that his throat grew so dry it felt like sandpaper, but he could not stop to drink. And then there were the mountains of Nevada, the Sierra Nevada range. These giant granite walls were the final, brutal barrier before the green valleys of California. Riders had to guide their horses along narrow ledges just inches wide, with 1,000-foot drops on one side. They did this at night in the pitch black. The physical toll on the riders was devastating. They rode for spurts of up to 100 miles at a time, switching horses every 10 to 15 miles. By the time they reached a relief station, their legs were so cramped they had to be lifted off their saddles. Their hands were often frozen to the leather reins, requiring warm water to melt them free. Their kidneys were bruised and bleeding from the constant violent bouncing of the gallop. They lived on a diet of hardtack, dried beef, and cornmeal, eating while in the saddle. Sleep was a luxury they could only dream of. Yet the elements were not the only threat waiting for them in the wilderness. The trail cut directly through the ancestral hunting grounds of powerful Native American tribes. For decades, these tribes had watched white settlers encroach on their ponyexpress stations, built on their water sources, were seen as an open act of invasion. As the summer of 1860 approached, the tension along the trail was reaching a boiling point. The riders knew they were being watched from the ridges. They could feel the eyes on them as they galloped through ambush. Every rustle of the brush sounded like an arrow cutting through the air. The company had promised them adventure and glory, but now they were riding straight into a war zone, and the first blow was about to fall. In the spring of 1860, a sudden silence fell over the Nevada desert. The Pony Express was barely a month old when the stations in the Great Basin suddenly stopped transmitting mail. Communication was severed by a brutal conflict known as the Pyramid Lake War. The trouble began at Williams Station, a lonely outpost along the Carson River. 3 men running the station had kidnapped 2 young Paiute girls, sparking immediate outrage among the local tribe. A small band of Paiute warriors rode to the station, rescued the girls, and left. They'd reached the silver mining boomtown of Virginia City. Panic spread like wildfire. The miners believed a massive Indian uprising was imminent, threatening to wipe out every white settlement in the territory. A poorly organized volunteer militia of over 100 men was quickly assembled under the command of Major William Ormsby. These men were not soldiers. They were saloon keepers, miners, and merchants looking for quick vengeance. Armed with mismatched rifles and riding untrained horses, Major William Ormsby led his men north toward Numaga. The peace-loving chief of the Paiutes had tried to avoid war, but his warriors were now ready for battle. As Major William Ormsby and his men entered a narrow canyon near the Truckee River, the hillsides suddenly erupted with gunfire. Paiute warriors, masterfully utilizing the terrain, surrounded the disorganized militia. The battle quickly turned into a rout as the terrified volunteers broke ranks and fled for their lives. Major William Ormsby and 75 of his men were killed in a desperate retreat. The survivors rode back to Virginia City, their terrifying tales sending the entire region into a state of absolute hysteria. Business stopped, mines closed, and women and children were locked inside the strongest stone buildings in town. The express trail through Nevada was completely shut down. Station keepers along a 300-mile stretch fled for their lives, leaving the horses behind. The Paiutes burned down 15 vital Pony Express stations, destroying the fragile chain of communication. For weeks, the western half of the trail was in no man's land, and the mail simply could not go through. In response, the United States government mobilized a massive force of regular Army soldiers and California volunteers, led by back into the Nevada desert to crush the Paiute resistance. A second, far bloodier battle was fought near Pyramid Lake in June. This time, The heavy artillery and organized tactics of the U.S. Army forced the Paiute warriors to retreat into the mountains. By the end of the summer, a fragile peace treaty was signed, but the damage to the Pony Express was catastrophic. The young company had lost dozens of brave employees. The cost of rebuilding the stations and paying for military escorts pushed the enterprise to the brink of financial ruin. But the mail had to move, and so the battle for the Pony Express was far from over, and the riders were ordered back into their saddles. The war had proven that the desert was a deadly obstacle, but an even greater threat was now brewing in the east, and that threat would soon force the riders to face their most dangerous mission yet. By early 1861, the United States was tearing itself apart at the seams. Abraham Lincoln had just been elected president, and the southern states were seceding one by one. The nation was on the brink of a bloody civil war, and communication between Washington and the gold-rich state of California was more critical than ever. The Union desperately needed California's gold to fund the coming war effort. Pacific coast entirely. The Pony Express was suddenly no longer just a business venture. It was the only thread holding the Union together. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. Just days later, the Pony Express received its most crucial delivery yet. It was President Lincoln's inaugural address, a speech that would determine the fate of the nation. The riders knew the stakes were higher than they had ever been. They had to carry this message across 2,000 miles of hostile territory in danger. Secessionist sympathizers in Nevada and California were actively trying to disrupt the flow of information. Guerrilla fighters patrolled the trails, looking for the lone riders. The riders had to travel like ghosts, absolute bare minimum to maximize speed. They carried no weapons other than a small revolver to save weight. They relied entirely on the speed of their horses to outrun any ambush. Rider Pony Bob Haslam was chosen for one of the most dangerous stretches through Nevada. The trail was crawling with hostile forces, but Haslam refused to 120 miles in a single stretch. When he reached his relief station, he found it had been burned to the ground. The station keeper was dead, and the horses were gone. With no fresh horse and no rest, Haslam pushed his exhausted mount forward into the darkness. Link. Thanks to riders like Haslam, Lincoln's address reached California in just 7 days and 17 hours. It was a world record for data transmission at the time. The speed of the delivery kept California loyal to the Union, but becoming unbearable. The company was losing thousands of dollars every single week. The cost of maintaining stations, horses, and riders was simply too high. And then, a new threat appeared on the horizon, one that didn't rely on horses at all. Workers began planting massive wooden poles across the plains, stringing copper wire between them. The transcontinental telegraph line was rapidly closing the gap from both east and west. The era of the galloping rider was facing a silent, lightning-fast competitor. Yet the riders kept running, delivering letters that kept families connected across a divided nation. They carried the news of battles won and lost, of lives spared and lives ended. They were the chaos. But the march of technology was relentless, and the end was coming faster than anyone anticipated. And then on a cold October morning, the final wire was spliced. By October of 1861, the brave riders of the Pony Express had conquered the brutal weather, the hostile territory, and the sheer exhaustion of the trail. But an invisible enemy was silently creeping across the vast American plains, moving faster than any Mustang ever could. This enemy did not copper wire humming with electricity. Congress had passed the Pacific Telegraph Act, putting two giant companies in a furious race to connect the Atlantic to the Pacific. The Creighton brothers led the charge from the east, pushing through Nebraska with an army of laborers and wooden poles. From the west, Sierra Nevada mountains. They were planting poles at a staggering rate of nearly 10 miles every single day. Each pole they hammered into the dirt was a nail in the coffin of the Pony Express. The riders could feel the end drawing near as they galloped past the construction crews. A rider would push his horse to its absolute limit, only to hear the strange metallic clicking of a telegraph key echoing from a newly built station. The copper wire was transmitting messages across the continent at the speed of light. A letter that once took 10 agonizing days to deliver by horse could now travel the same distance in a fraction of a second. The founders of the Pony Express, William Russell, Alexander Majors, and William Waddell, watched their dream evaporate. They had poured their fortunes into the venture, hoping for a lucrative government mail contract that never came. The company was already drowning in hundreds of thousands. Every station and every horse feed bill was bleeding them dry. On October 24, 1861, the two construction crews finally met in Salt Lake City, Utah. Stephen J. Field, the Chief Justice of California, sent the very first transcontinental telegram straight to President Abraham Lincoln. The message congratulated the Union. The magic of the instant message had officially conquered the American West. Just 2 days later, on October 26, 1861, the Pony Express was officially terminated. The legendary service had lasted for only 19 fleeting months. The horses were sold off, the stations were abandoned to the desert wind, and the riders were out of a job. The beginning of a wild new chapter. For 18 months, the riders of the Pony Express had defied the wilderness, but the click of the telegraph key had just rendered them obsolete. Almost overnight, the trail that had buzzed with intense energy fell completely silent. Stations that had been built with sweat and blood were abandoned to the desert winds. In late October 1861, mail that had already lost its urgency. Young men who had risked their lives for $5 a week suddenly found themselves without a job. They turned their horses away from the stations and dispersed into the growing towns of the West. The thousands of specialized horses, selected for their speed and endurance, were sold off to livery stables and stagecoach lines. The great enterprise had vanished like a summer storm, leaving behind a trail of empty wooden shacks and stone ruins. In the deep valleys of Utah, the wooden stables began to rot under the heavy winter snows. In the deserts of Nevada, the relentless sun baked the mud brick walls until they crumbled back into the dust. Local scavengers carried away the timber, the iron hinges, and the water barrels. For decades, the path of the Pony Express was marked only by these decaying skeletons of progress. Wind blew through the empty doorways where station keepers had once stood guard with loaded shotguns. The watering holes, once kept clear of debris, filled with silt and wild weeds. Wild sagebrush reclaimed the narrow dirt tracks that had been carved by hundreds of pounding hooves. Travelers on the Transcontinental Railroad would look out their windows and glimpse these lonely ruins in the distance. They would point to a collapsing chimney or a broken fence line, remembering the legends of the young riders. But as the years pressed on, even those physical remnants began to disappear from the landscape. The graves of the riders who had died along the route were swallowed by the prairie grass. Names, carved into the canyon walls by lonely station keepers, slowly faded under the erosion of wind and rain. By the turn of the century, the physical trail had become a ghost, living mostly in the memories of aging men. Yet the spirit of what these men had accomplished could not be erased by time or weather. They had proven that the vast American continent could be bridged by sheer human will. They had connected a fractured nation during its darkest hour of civil war. And though the telegraph had won the battle of speed, the Pony Express had won the battle of legend. Today, modern highways follow the exact paths forged by those desperate, speeding horses. If you stand quietly near the ruins of the Cold Spring Station, you can almost hear the faint echo of a brass horn. You can almost feel the vibration of hooves pounding against the hard-packed earth. The ruins stand as silent monuments to an era of unmatched bravery and frantic speed. But while the physical trail had crumbled into dust, the financial final victims. The Pony Express was officially dead, buried by the hum of the telegraph wire. But as the riders turned their horses loose, a strange thing happened. the legend of the mail carriers refused to fade into the dust. In fact, it was just beginning to grow. As the years rolled on, the story of the young boys on horseback. The nation was rapidly changing, industrializing and paving over the wild country. Yet people clung to the image of the lone rider racing against the horizon. One man in particular made sure the world would never forget them. His name was William Cody, but the world knew him as Buffalo Bill. He was 14 years old. Whether his wildest tales were entirely true or slightly stretched did not matter to the crowds. He launched his famous Wild West show, bringing the thrill of the trail to millions of people across America and Europe. He hired former riders, dressed them in bright red shirts, and had them reenact the lightning mail runs in front of roaring crowds. Even Queen Victoria herself sat in the audience, watching the dusty drama of the American West unfold. Because of these spectacles, the Pony Express became a global symbol of American grit. But behind the theatrical glamour, the physical trail itself began to vanish. Ruts carved by thousands of iron-shod hooves were slowly reclaimed by sagebrush and wild grass. The sturdy wooden stations, once bustling with sweat and tension, down by homesteaders for firewood. Others were simply swallowed by the shifting sands of the Great Basin. Yet the memory of the trail was kept alive by the communities that grew around those old stops. Towns like Gothenburg, Nebraska, and Marysville, Kansas, proudly preserved their walk inside these tiny, dark cabins and feel the heavy silence of the past. You can touch the rough-hewn logs that once shielded young boys from freezing blizzards and incoming arrows. In 1992, the United States Congress officially designated the route as the Pony Express National Historic Trail. Modern adventurers can follow the exact path from Missouri to California. Every year, hundreds of riders participate in a massive recreation of the sling a leather mochila over their saddles and carry real mail across the rugged terrain. They ride day and night, passing the mail from hand to hand, just like the teenagers of 1860. It is a living tribute to a business venture that lasted only 19 months. The Pony Express was a financial disaster that bankrupted its founders and William Waddell. It was quickly made obsolete by a single copper wire strung across the continent. And yet, no other chapter in American history captures the imagination quite like those 80 riders and their 400 horses. They proved that the vast, terrifying distance of the American continent could be conquered by human will. They connected a fractured country on the brink of its darkest civil war. They rode with a courage that defied the elements, the terrain. Telegraph wires eventually fell, the steam engines grew old, and the space age arrived. But in the quiet canyons of Utah and the windy plains of Wyoming, if you listen closely to the wind, you can still hear it. You can hear the faint, steady rhythm of galloping hooves, carrying the mail into eternity.